camera finds Saif al-Islam Gaddafi in the final seconds before his world explodes. November 19th, 2011. Somewhere in the Libyan desert, his convoy races through sand dunes, bullets tearing through metal. Blood streams from his hand where shrapnel tore through flesh. The satellite phone crackles with his father's final transmission from Sirte. Screams, gunfire, then silence. Muammar Gaddafi is dead. Saif grips a pistol with his good hand, knowing militia fighters are closing in. 3 of his brothers are already corpses. International courts want him for crimes against humanity. Rebels want his head on a pike. He has nowhere to run. The convoy stops. Headlights surround them. Saif steps out, hands raised, and speaks words that will haunt Libya for the next decade. My father's soul will never die, and neither will I. Freeze frame. Rewind 10 months. How did the son of Africa's most eccentric dictator, a London-educated reformer who partied with supermodels and lectured at prestigious universities, become one of the world's most wanted men? Before we dive into one of the most dramatic political stories of the 21st century, a story that connects Libyan tribal warfare to French presidential scandals, revolutionary uprisings to international criminal courts, and a decade-long disappearance to one of the most shocking political comebacks in modern history. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel and hit that notification bell. This investigation took months of research across 3 continents, and you won't want to miss a single development. Now, let's begin where it all started. Tripoli, Libya, June 1972. The Mediterranean sun beats down on the capital of a nation transformed by oil wealth and revolutionary fervor. In the fortified compound of Bab al-Azizia, a second son is born to Colonel Muammar Gaddafi and his wife Safiya Farkash. They name him Saif al-Islam, Sword of Islam, a name carrying weight in a nation where names are prophecies and symbols matter more than wealth. The Libya into which Saif is born barely resembles the country his father seized 3 years earlier. Muammar Gaddafi, a 27-year-old army captain, overthrew King Idris in a bloodless coup in September 1969, establishing what he called the Jamahiriya, state of the masses. But this was no ordinary revolution. Gaddafi's vision combined Arab nationalism, Islamic socialism, anti-Western rhetoric, and increasingly bizarre political philosophy outlined in his rambling Green Book. Saif's childhood unfolds behind the high walls of Bab al-Azizia, where Bedouin tents sit beside modern buildings, where his father holds court in flowing robes while plotting to export revolution across Africa and the Middle East. The compound is a world unto itself, armed guards at every corner, relatives living in adjacent buildings, the constant presence of security personnel who watch everything, record everything, trust nothing. Saif is the second son, but carries different weight than his older brother Muhammad. His mother, Safiya, comes from the Barasa tribe, one of Libya's most influential tribal confederations. In a nation where tribal loyalty often supersedes national identity, where blood bonds determine political alliances and family feuds can spark armed conflicts, this maternal connection gives Saif access to networks his father needs to maintain control. But tribal politics bore young Saif. While his brothers play soldier, fascinated by weapons and military hardware, Saif gravitates toward art and architecture. He spends hours sketching, painting, imagining buildings that combine modern design with traditional Islamic patterns. His father notices this divergence with mixed feelings, pride that his son shows intellectual curiosity, concern that he lacks the warrior spirit required to survive in a nation built on revolutionary violence. The Gaddafi children grow up isolated from ordinary Libyans. They attend private schools, travel in armored convoys. I vacation in Europe while most Libyans struggle despite the nation's oil wealth. Yet Muammar insists his children understand the conspiracy against their family. He gathers them regularly to explain how foreign powers, Americans, British, Zionists, plot to destroy the revolution, assassinate the family, steal Libya's resources. Paranoia becomes their inheritance. Saif absorbs these lessons but develops his own interpretation. Where his father sees enemies requiring violent suppression, young Saif begins imagining diplomatic solutions. Where Muammar preaches permanent revolution, Saif dreams of modernization and reform. These differences remain unspoken during childhood, but they're growing, waiting for the right moment to emerge. By 1990, 18-year-old Saif enrolls at Al-Fateh University in Tripoli to study architecture. It's a calculated choice, prestigious enough to satisfy family expectations, creative enough to satisfy his own interests, and politically neutral enough to avoid the military path his brothers pursue. The university experience exposes Saif to Libya's educated elite, young men and women who whisper about the revolution's failures, who know that oil wealth enriches the ruling family while infrastructure crumbles, who've heard stories about Abu Salim prison where political dissidents vanish into darkness. But these conversations happen carefully, quietly, because everyone knows the revolutionary committees maintain informant networks throughout the university. Saif proves to be a talented student. His architectural designs blend modernist functionality with traditional Libyan aesthetic elements. Arched doorways, geometric patterns inspired by Islamic art, courtyards designed for the Mediterranean climate. His professors praise his technical skills and creative vision, but Saif's real education happens outside classrooms. Through university connections, Saif begins meeting foreigners, diplomats' children, oil company executives' kids, visiting professors. They introduce him to perspectives his father's compound never permitted. They speak about democracy, human rights, economic freedom. They mention that most of the world views Muammar Gaddafi not as a revolutionary hero, but as an eccentric dictator who sponsors terrorism and oppresses his own people. This creates cognitive dissonance Saif struggles to reconcile. At home, his father is a visionary leading Libya toward greatness. In international opinion, his father is a pariah whose regime makes Libya a global outcast. Both cannot be true. Or can they? Saif begins painting during this period. Portraits mostly, but with disturbing themes. His favorite subject is his father. Canvas after canvas depicts Muammar Gaddafi in various poses, mounted on horseback, addressing crowds, staring pensively at horizons. The paintings are technically skilled but psychologically revealing. Art critics who later analyze them note an ambivalence in how Saif renders his father, simultaneously glorifying and questioning, celebrating and critiquing. In 1997, Saif makes a decision that will reshape his trajectory. He wants to study abroad. Specifically, he wants to pursue graduate studies in Europe. The request creates tension within the Gaddafi family. Muammar worries about foreign influence corrupting his son. Security officials warn about assassination risks. Libyan dissidents in exile would love to strike at Gaddafi's family. Brothers mock Saif's intellectual pretensions. But Muammar ultimately agrees, seeing potential advantages. If Saif can navigate Western institutions successfully, he might become a bridge between revolutionary Libya and the international community. The regime desperately needs to escape international sanctions imposed after Libyan intelligence agents bombed Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland in 1988, killing 270 people. Saif arrives in Vienna, Austria in 1998 to pursue studies in economic management. The transition shocks him. For the first time, he lives without constant security, without the assumption of privilege, without the name Gaddafi opening every door. He rents a modest apartment, rides public transportation, shops in ordinary stores. Classmates treat him as just another student. Some don't even know his father rules Libya. Vienna's cosmopolitan atmosphere transforms Saif's worldview. He attends concerts, visits museums, debates politics in cafes where people openly criticize their governments without fear of arrest. He watches the news and sees his father portrayed as a buffoon or tyrant, never as the wise revolutionary leader he grew up believing him to be. But Saif doesn't reject his heritage. Instead, he develops a more sophisticated understanding of Libya's position in the world. He begins conceptualizing himself as a reformer who can modernize Libya while preserving his family's power. It's an ambitious vision, perhaps naive, but it becomes his guiding mission. In Vienna, Saif also discovers Western nightlife, clubs, bars, parties with international students, a social scene utterly foreign to conservative Libyan society. He learns to navigate between two worlds, the disciplined student by day, the socialite by night. This duality becomes characteristic of his entire life. Simultaneously, Libyan and cosmopolitan, revolutionary heir and Western-educated liberal, his father's defender and secret critic. He earns his degree in economic management in 2000, writing a thesis on economic development strategies for resource-dependent nations. Essentially, a blueprint for reforming Libya's oil-based economy. The work is competent, though not groundbreaking, but it represents Saif's intellectual evolution from architect to economic thinker to political strategist. Upon returning to Libya in 2000, Saif faces a critical choice about his role in the regime. His brothers have carved out fiefdoms. Mohammed controls telecommunications. Mutassim handles security. Kamis commands an elite military brigade. Hannibal runs wild with diplomatic immunity. What space remains for the intellectual brother who prefers negotiation to intimidation? Saif's answer is the Gaddafi International Charity and Development Foundation, established in 2000 with significant state funding. On paper, it's a humanitarian organization focused on development projects, poverty alleviation, and international goodwill. In practice, it becomes Saif's vehicle for building political capital, both domestically and internationally. The foundation's annual budget reaches hundreds of millions of dollars. Exact figures remain opaque. But estimates suggest $200 to $300 million at its peak. This war chest allows Saif to fund projects his father's government won't. Human rights initiatives, prison reform proposals, educational scholarships, medical clinics in underserved regions. Every Ramadan, the foundation distributes food packages to poor Libyan families. Trucks bearing Saif's image deliver rice, oil, sugar, dates to neighborhoods where government services barely function. It's classic patronage politics, but Saif executes it with genuine enthusiasm. Unlike his brothers who see Libya's poor as irrelevant masses, Saif develops relationships with tribal leaders and community organizers, listening to their grievances, promising reforms. The foundation also becomes Libya's informal diplomatic channel. While Muammar Gaddafi's government remains internationally isolated, Saif's foundation operates globally. He establishes offices in London, Geneva, and Paris. He hires Western consultants, lawyers, and public relations specialists. He begins the slow work of rehabilitating Libya's image. The first major test comes in 2000, when Abu Sayyaf militants in the Philippines kidnapped 21 hostages, including Western tourists. After months of failed negotiations, the militants reach out to unlikely mediators, Muammar Gaddafi's government, which has connections throughout the Islamic militant world. Saif takes the lead. He flies to the Philippines with a team of negotiators and, critically, a briefcase containing ransom money. The exact amount remains disputed. Figures range from $10 million to $25 million, but the transaction works. The hostages are released. Western governments publicly deny paying ransom while privately acknowledging Saif's role. It's a diplomatic coup for the young Gaddafi, demonstrating that he can deliver results where conventional diplomacy fails. But the hostage negotiation also reveals Saif's moral complexity. He's simultaneously helping terrorists acquire funding and rescuing innocent victims. He's using his father's blood money, oil wealth extracted from a nation where many live in poverty, to buy international goodwill. These contradictions don't seem to trouble him, or perhaps he's learned to compartmentalize, separating the humanitarian work he wants to do from the authoritarian system enabling it. The hostage success emboldens Saif to tackle Libya's most sensitive international problem: compensation for victims of Libyan-sponsored terrorism. Two attacks haunt Libya's international standing: the 1988 Lockerbie bombing and the 1989 UTA Flight 772 bombing over Niger. The UTA bombing killed 170 people, mostly French citizens, when Libyan intelligence agents planted explosives on the Paris to Brazzaville flight. Among the victims were families, children, aid workers, innocents destroyed by Libya's shadowy war against France, which Gaddafi blamed for supporting Chadian forces fighting Libya's proxy war in northern Chad. Saif decides to personally engage with victims' families, a decision requiring extraordinary courage or extraordinary arrogance, perhaps both. In 2002, he travels to Paris to meet with the Association of Families of Victims of UTA Flight 772, a group that has campaigned for justice for 13 years. The meeting takes place in a nondescript conference room. Saif enters wearing an expensive suit, his manner polite but guarded. Across the table sit middle-aged men and women who lost parents, siblings, children to his father's regime. The atmosphere crackles with tension. One woman, her voice shaking with controlled rage, tells Saif about her daughter, 23 years old, traveling to volunteer at an African orphanage obliterated over the Sahara Desert. "Your family took my child," she says. "What can you possibly say to me?" Saif doesn't flinch. Nothing I say can restore what you lost, but I can work toward justice, toward compensation, toward ensuring this never happens again. Justice would be your father in prison, another victim's relative interjects. Justice would be everyone who planned this attack facing trial. I cannot deliver that, Saif admits. But I can deliver compensation. I can deliver acknowledgement. I can deliver a future where Libya is not a pariah state, but a responsible international partner. The negotiations stretch across 2 years. Saif learns the bombing's devastating details, bodies scattered across hundreds of square miles, personal effects recovered from the desert, families who never received remains to bury. He also learns uncomfortable truths about his own family's role. His uncle, Abdullah Senussi, Libya's intelligence chief and his mother's brother, is widely believed to have orchestrated the UTA bombing. Senussi remains powerful, feared, completely untouchable within Libya's power structure. Saif cannot deliver him to French justice without destroying family unity and probably triggering his own death. So Saif offers what he can: money. In 2004, after protracted negotiations, Libya agrees to pay $170 million to UTA victims' families. It's approximately $1 million per victim, a figure that disgusts some families as blood money, while others accept it as the only justice they'll ever receive. The process transforms Saif in subtle ways. Confronting the human cost of his father's policies forces him to recognize that Libya's revolutionary rhetoric has real victims. Yet he doesn't break with his family. Instead, he develops a rationalization. The past was terrible, but he represents a different future. He can reform Libya from within, gradually transforming the regime into something less brutal. This belief that he can be simultaneously a Gaddafi and a reformer becomes Saif's defining characteristic and ultimate tragedy. In 2003, Saif makes another bold move, enrolling at the London School of Economics, LSE, to pursue a doctorate in political philosophy. The decision raises eyebrows across diplomatic circles. LSE is one of the world's premier universities for international relations and political theory. Its faculty includes leading scholars of democracy, human rights, and governance. What is Muammar Gaddafi's son doing there? The British government quietly supports Saif's enrollment. By 2003, Libya is negotiating its return to international legitimacy. Muammar Gaddafi has agreed to dismantle Libya's nuclear weapons program, a program that never became operational but existed on paper, and compensate Lockerbie victims. British Prime Minister Tony Blair sees opportunity for lucrative oil deals if Libya fully rehabilitates. Saif becomes a bridge. He meets regularly with British intelligence officials, diplomats, and business leaders. He assures them his father is sincere about reform. He promises that a new Libya, perhaps one he eventually leads, will be a reliable Western partner. At LSE, Saif attracts attention for both his academic work and his lifestyle. He rents a luxury townhouse in Hampstead, one of London's most expensive neighborhoods. He drives expensive cars. He's photographed at exclusive nightclubs with models and celebrities. Paparazzi capture him with Naomi Campbell at a fashion show. He attends parties on yachts in the Mediterranean. Yet he also attends lectures, participates in seminars, and works on his dissertation. The role of civil society in the democratization of global governance institutions, from soft power to collective decision-making. The title alone suggests Saif's intellectual ambitions. He's grappling with how to reform authoritarian systems from within, how civil society can pressure institutions toward democracy, how soft power can achieve what hard power cannot. His academic supervisor and several professors later describe Saif as a serious student, genuinely interested in political reform. Others whisper that he's a dilettante whose admission was facilitated by his family's wealth and political connections. Both assessments contain truth. The LSE relationship becomes controversial when the university accepts a £1.5 million donation from Saif's foundation in 2009. The same year, Saif completes his doctorate. Critics immediately allege that Saif essentially purchased his PhD. LSE launches an internal investigation, interviews faculty, reviews Saif's dissertation. The conclusion is ambiguous. The dissertation is deemed adequate but not exceptional. Competent work that meets minimum standards for a doctorate but doesn't represent groundbreaking scholarship. Some faculty members defend Saif's academic credentials. Others privately admit the donation created pressure to award the degree. What's undeniable is that Saif uses his LSE credentials extensively. He lectures at the university. He's invited to speak at international conferences. He writes op-eds for Western newspapers arguing for engagement with Libya. He becomes the acceptable face of the Gaddafi regime, educated, articulate, apparently committed to reform. This carefully constructed image serves multiple purposes. It provides diplomatic cover for Western governments wanting to do business with Libya. It gives Saif political capital within Libya as the cosmopolitan son who understands the outside world. And it feeds Saif's self-conception as a bridge between civilizations, a reformer who can modernize his nation. But underneath the Polish lies unresolved tension. Can someone truly reform a regime while benefiting from its power and wealth? Can a dictator's son genuinely champion democracy? Saif believes the answer is yes. Events will prove him tragically wrong. By 2008, Saif al-Islam Gaddafi occupies a unique position. He's not officially part of Libya's government. His father never gives him a formal title. Yet diplomats, intelligence services, and journalists treat him as the heir apparent, the future leader of a reforming Libya. WikiLeaks cables from this period, released years later, reveal how Western governments assessed Saif. American diplomats describe him as the most likely successor who is popular with youth and reform-minded Libyans. British officials note his genuine desire for reform while acknowledging his complicated relationship with his father's hardline supporters. French intelligence warns that Saif's brothers, particularly Mutassim and Khamis, view him as a threat and might move against him if Muammar dies. Saif cultivates a network of intellectuals, journalists, and activists who believe he represents Libya's democratic future. He funds independent media outlets targeting young Libyans. He proposes constitutional reforms that would limit his father's absolute power. He even publicly criticizes aspects of his father's governance, carefully, obliquely, but noticeably. In a 2006 interview with a European journalist, Saif says something revealing. "Democracy is the best system. I believe this completely. Monarchy, dictatorship, these are systems of the past. Libya must evolve." The journalist asks if this includes his own family potentially relinquishing power. Saif smiles. Evolution can maintain stability while changing everything else. That's the art of reform. It's a perfect encapsulation of Saif's contradiction, advocating democracy while assuming his family retains control, promising change while preserving power, imagining reform without revolution. But Libya's internal politics are more complex than Saif's theoretical frameworks. The regime rests on a delicate balance between tribal loyalties, revolutionary institutions, security services, and family networks. Any reform threatens someone's power. Any opening toward democracy risks unleashing forces that might devour the reformer. Saif's brothers recognize this better than he does. They've built their positions through violence and intimidation, not intellectual persuasion. They understand that in Libya, power comes from controlling weapons, money, and information, not from Western degrees or reform proposals. The tension within the Gaddafi family grows through the late 2000s. Mutassim wants to be named heir apparent. Khamis expands his military brigade. Muhammad consolidates telecommunications control. Saif maneuvers in political and diplomatic spheres, believing his international connections and popular support will prevail. No one knows it yet, but they're all racing toward catastrophe. Before we continue with the story of how Saif al-Islam Gaddafi went from reformer to war criminal, from London socialite to hunted fugitive, if you're finding this investigation compelling, take a moment to like this video and drop a comment below. What do you think? Was Saif genuinely committed to reform, or was it all a performance to maintain his family's power? The answer might surprise you as this story unfolds. In 2008, Saif confronts the darkest episode in his father's regime, the Abu Salim prison massacre. For 12 years, this atrocity remained Libya's open secret. Everyone knew, no one could speak. June 29, 1996, Abu Salim prison, Tripoli. Over 1,200 political prisoners, held in horrific conditions, decide they've suffered enough. They begin protesting, demanding better food, medical care, family visits, basic human dignity. The protest starts peacefully. Prisoners in cell block A refuse meals. They chant slogans. Guards watch nervously. Within hours, tension escalates. Some prisoners seize guards. The situation spirals. Muammar Gaddafi and his brother-in-law, Abdullah Senussi, make a decision. Crush the protest with maximum violence. On June 29th, security forces open fire through cell bars. Prisoners are trapped. The cells are locked. There's nowhere to run. The shooting continues for hours. When silence finally falls, more than 1,200 men are dead. Their bodies are buried in mass graves. Families receive no notification. The men simply vanish. For years afterward, families gather outside Abu Salim demanding answers. Where are our sons, they ask. Where are our husbands, our fathers, our brothers? The regime responds with silence and intimidation. Asking too many questions about Abu Salim can make you the next to disappear. But by 2008, Saif is promoting himself as a reformer. The Abu Salim families represent a test. If he's genuinely committed to change, he must address this massacre. If he's just performing reform for Western audiences, he'll ignore it like his father has for 12 years. Saif chooses to engage. Through his foundation, he reaches out to Abu Salim families and offers a meeting. It's an extraordinary moment. The son of the man who ordered the massacre sitting across from the families of the victims. The meeting happens in a conference room in Tripoli. Approximately 30 family representatives attend, mostly women, mothers and wives and sisters who've carried grief and rage for 12 years. Saif enters with his advisors, looking nervous despite his usual confidence. A woman named Fatih Terbil, who lost a brother in the massacre, speaks first. "We want the truth. We want justice. We want to know where our family members are buried so we can pray at their graves. Can you give us this?" Saif's response stuns the room. What happened at Abu Salim was a tragedy, a crime. I acknowledge this. I cannot undo it, but I can work toward justice. It's the first time a Gaddafi has publicly admitted the massacre occurred. Families weep, from relief that their loss is finally acknowledged, from rage that it took 12 years, from fear that this admission might lead nowhere. Saif promises financial compensation for the families. He promises to investigate the massacre. He even suggests that those responsible might face accountability, a stunning claim given that those responsible include his father and uncle. Over the following months, the foundation distributes compensation payments, reportedly around $150,000 per family, though exact figures vary. Some families accept, others refuse, calling it blood money that doesn't bring justice. But Saif doesn't deliver on the larger promise. No investigation occurs. No one is held accountable. Abdullah Senussi, the massacre's architect, remains Libya's intelligence chief. The mass graves are never officially excavated. Families still don't know where their loved ones are buried. The Abu Salim episode reveals Saif's limitations. He can acknowledge crimes. He can offer money, but he cannot challenge the power structure that enabled the crimes. He cannot confront his own family's culpability. He wants reform without consequence, change without accountability. This failure will haunt him. 3 years later, when revolution comes to Libya, the Abu Salim families will be among the first to rise up, and they will remember that Saif acknowledged their pain but delivered no justice. In 2008 and 2010, Saif brokers another controversial initiative, negotiating the release of Islamist prisoners from Libyan jails. It's a complex, morally ambiguous project that earns him both praise and condemnation. Libya's prisons hold thousands of Islamists, members of the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, LIFG, Muslim Brotherhood sympathizers, anyone suspected of religious extremism. Many have been tortured. Some have been held for decades without trial. Human rights organizations have documented horrific abuse. Saif sees an opportunity. If he can negotiate with the Islamist prisoners, convince them to renounce violence and secure their release, he'll demonstrate his reform credentials internationally while potentially defusing domestic opposition. He brings in a Libyan Islamic scholar named Ali Salabi to facilitate negotiations. Salabi talks to imprisoned LIFG leaders, discussing Islamic jurisprudence, the legitimacy of violence against Muslim rulers, the possibility of peaceful political participation. After months of negotiation, LIFG leaders produce a document renouncing violent jihad. It's a significant ideological shift for a group that fought against the Gaddafi regime for years. In exchange, Saif arranges their release. Between 2008 and 2010, hundreds of Islamist prisoners are freed. Saif appears at some release ceremonies, shaking hands with former militants, talking about reconciliation and a new Libya. International media praise him as a pragmatic reformer who can achieve what his father's brutality never could. neutralizing opposition through dialogue rather than violence. But inside Libya, the prisoner releases generate fierce backlash. Security hardliners, including Saif's uncle Abdullah Senussi, view it as weakness. "You're releasing men who want to destroy us," Senussi reportedly tells Saif. "The moment they're free, they'll plot against the regime." Some of Saif's brothers agree. They've built their power on the principle that opposition must be crushed, not negotiated with. Saif's approach seems dangerously naive. Events will prove the hardliners partially right. When revolution erupts in 2011, some released Islamists join the uprising. They don't necessarily lead it. The revolution's drivers are broader than any single group, but their participation feeds the narrative that Saif's reforms weaken the regime. Yet Saif remains convinced he's charting the right course. In a 2010 interview, he argues, "You can imprison men's bodies, but not their ideas. If we want stability, we must address grievances, allow peaceful political expression, integrate opposition into the system. The alternative is permanent repression, which eventually fails." It's a sophisticated analysis. The problem is that Saif imagines he can control the pace and scope of reform. He envisions managed liberalization that preserves his family's ultimate authority. He doesn't understand or refuses to accept that reform is fire. Once lit, it burns in directions you cannot predict or control. December 17th, 2010. Tunisia. A fruit vendor named Mohammed Bouazizi sets himself on fire to protest police harassment. His desperate act of self-immolation ignites protests that spread across Tunisia. Within weeks, Tunisia's dictator, Zine El Abidine Ben Ali, flees to Saudi Arabia. The Arab Spring has begun. January 25th, 2011. Egypt. Massive protests erupt in Cairo's Tahrir Square, demanding the resignation of President Hosni Mubarak, who has ruled Egypt for 30 years. The world watches as Egypt, the Arab world's most populous nation, teeters on the edge of revolution. In Tripoli, the Gaddafi regime watches nervously. Muammar Gaddafi has ruled Libya since 1969, longer than the deposed Tunisian and potentially soon-to-be deposed Egyptian leaders. If revolution can topple Arab dictators who seemed invincible, Libya could be next. Saif monitors the situation from London, where he's attending to foundation business. He speaks with his father by phone. Muammar is characteristically defiant. "Libya is not Tunisia. Libya is not Egypt. Our revolution is genuine. The people love us." But Saif knows better. He spent years talking to young Libyans who quietly complain about unemployment, corruption, lack of freedom. He knows the regime's legitimacy is more fragile than his father admits. February 11th, 2011. Mubarak resigns. Egypt celebrates. The impossible has happened. 30 years of dictatorship ended by 18 days of protests. February 15th, 2011. Benghazi, Libya. It begins. The spark is familiar. Families of Abu Salim massacre victims. They're planning a protest for February 17th, the 5-year anniversary of a demonstration that security forces violently suppressed. Human rights lawyer Fatih Terbil, who represents Abu Salim families, is arrested in Benghazi. Word spreads quickly. Within hours, hundreds of people gather outside the police station, demanding Terbil's release. It's a small protest by regional standards, nothing like the massive crowds in Tunis or Cairo. But in Libya, where public dissent has been crushed for 4 decades, any unauthorized gathering is extraordinary. Security forces respond with typical brutality. They beat protesters with batons. They fire tear gas. Most protesters disperse, but the seed is planted. February 16th, 2011. Protests continue in Benghazi. They're larger now, thousands of people, mostly young men, chanting against corruption and demanding reform. Muammar Gaddafi's image is burned. Revolutionary slogans are shouted. Security forces kill several protesters. February 17th, 2011. The planned Day of Rage arrives. Protests erupt not just in Benghazi, but in cities across eastern Libya, Baida, Derna, Tobruk. In Benghazi, protesters attack government buildings. Police stations burn. A revolutionary momentum builds that terrifies Tripoli. Saif watches from London, his phones ringing constantly. His father's security advisors want immediate, massive retaliation. His brothers are mobilizing military units. Everyone is asking, what should we do? Saif flies back to Libya on February 19th. He believes he can be the voice of reason, the reformer who can diffuse the crisis through dialogue and concessions. He's convinced his reputation as a reformer gives him credibility with protesters. He's about to discover how completely he's misjudged the situation. February 20th, 2011. 1:30 a.m. Saif al-Islam Gaddafi appears on Libyan state television. He's wearing a dark suit, looking tired and tense. For the next 40 minutes, he delivers a speech that will define his legacy and seal his fate. The speech begins reasonably. Saif acknowledges protesters' legitimate grievances. He admits mistakes in governance. He talks about reform, constitution writing, increased freedoms. For viewers who know him as the reformer, this sounds like vintage Saif, acknowledging problems, promising solutions. But then the tone shifts. We will fight to the last minute. Until the last bullet, Saif says, his voice rising. We will not leave Libya to the Italians or the French, or to Al-Qaeda. I'm not a president who will run away. We're not Tunisia or Egypt. We're not Hosni Mubarak, who ran away like a woman. The threat is unmistakable. This isn't negotiation. It's ultimatum. He continues, Libya is made up of tribes and clans. If you don't agree, we'll have civil war. There will be rivers of blood. Libya will burn. You'll have no oil, no gas. Libya will be the new Somalia. You think you have weapons now? Wait until you see what we have. We will crush you. The reformer mask has slipped completely. This is the dictator's son, dropping all pretense, threatening mass violence against his own people. Saif plays a video showing protests, claiming they're led by drug addicts and foreign agents. He insists only small groups are protesting while the vast majority of Libyans support his father. He promises reforms, a new constitution within hours, more press freedom, better governance, but always returns to the threat, submit or die. 48 hours ago you were safe, he says. Now, if we don't agree, you'll have chaos. Cities will burn. Tribes will fight. This is your last chance. The speech lasts 40 minutes. When it ends, Saif looks exhausted, perhaps sensing he's crossed a line from which there's no return. The reaction is immediate and catastrophic. In Benghazi, protesters who might have accepted reforms now want revolution. Saif's threats outrage them. His claims about foreign agents and drug addicts insult them. His promise to fight to the last bullet tells them the regime will show no mercy. Within hours, protests intensify. In Benghazi, revolutionaries seize weapons from army bases. Military units defect. The city's main square is renamed Freedom Square. Muammar Gaddafi's image is torn down and stomped on. Saif's speech also destroys his international reputation. Western diplomats who viewed him as a potential reformer now see him as just another Gaddafi, willing to drown opposition in blood to preserve family power. His LSE degree, his foundation work, his careful cultivation of a progressive image, all wasted in 40 minutes. Years later, legal experts analyzing Saif's speech for the International Criminal Court note specific phrases that constitute incitement to violence, threats of civil war, promises to fight to the last bullet, warnings of rivers of blood. These aren't political rhetoric. Under international law, they're potential evidence of crimes against humanity. But in the moment, Saif doesn't recognize the magnitude of his mistake. He believes he's delivered a tough but necessary message. He thinks protesters will back down when confronted with the regime's determination to use overwhelming force. He's convinced that Libya is different from Tunisia and Egypt, that his father's revolutionary credentials and tribal support will prevent regime collapse. He's catastrophically wrong on every count. February 21st to 28th, 2011. Libya explodes. The revolution Saif promised to crush with bullets spreads like wildfire across the country. In Benghazi, revolutionaries control the entire city. They establish a transitional national council to coordinate opposition. Military units defect en masse. Libya's second-largest city has become the revolution's capital. In Misrata, Libya's third-largest city, protests turn into urban warfare. Government forces attack with tanks and artillery. Revolutionaries fight back with captured weapons and improvised explosives. The city becomes a symbol of resistance, surrounded, bombarded, but refusing to surrender. Across eastern Libya, Beda, Derna, Tobruk, one city after another falls to revolutionaries. The map of regime control shrinks dramatically. Within a week, Muammar Gaddafi controls Tripoli and parts of western Libya, but has lost the entire east. Saif watches the collapse with growing desperation. He's not a military commander. That's his brother's domain. His role becomes propaganda and diplomacy, trying to convince the world that Libya's revolution is actually a foreign-backed terrorist conspiracy. He gives interviews to Western media, offering a different tone than his February 20th speech. There are misunderstandings, he tells CNN. We want dialogue. We want reform. But we face armed gangs supported by Al-Qaeda and foreign intelligence services. It's a narrative the regime will push throughout the war. Libya isn't experiencing a legitimate revolution, but a terrorist insurgency. The protesters aren't Libyans seeking freedom, but foreign agents seeking to steal Libya's oil. Few believe it. The protest movements are too widespread, too diverse, too obviously homegrown. But Saif keeps trying, because what else can he do? Meanwhile, his uncle Abdullah Senussi takes charge of the regime's military response. Senussi is a man without Saif's ambitions for international respectability. He understands only force. Under his direction, security forces attack protesters with live ammunition, artillery, and airstrikes. Videos emerge of horrific violence, protesters shot in the streets, wounded men denied medical care, mass graves. The revolution's death toll climbs into hundreds, then thousands. International response builds quickly. The UN Security Council imposes sanctions on the Gaddafi regime. The International Criminal Court launches an investigation into crimes against humanity. The Arab League suspends Libya's membership, but sanctions and investigations won't stop the killing. Revolutionaries need more than moral support. They need weapons, training, and military intervention to counter Gaddafi's superior firepower. March 2011. The tide begins to turn against the revolution. Muammar Gaddafi's forces, using heavy weapons and air power, push back against revolutionary forces in western Libya. The strategic city of Zawiya falls to government troops. Misrata remains under brutal siege. Most ominously, government forces advance on Benghazi. Revolutionaries send desperate pleas for help. Without intervention, they warn, Benghazi will fall, and when it falls, Muammar Gaddafi has promised there will be no mercy. He's called revolutionaries rats, who must be exterminated. The threat of massacre looms. Saif is present at strategy meetings, where military action is planned. He's crossed his own line. The reformer has become the regime defender. The humanitarian has become complicit in war crimes. He can tell himself he's trying to preserve Libya from chaos. But the blood is real, the deaths are mounting, and his role is undeniable. March 17th, 2011. The UN Security Council passes Resolution 1973, authorizing all necessary measures to protect Libyan civilians. It's diplomatic language for military intervention. Within days, NATO forces led by France, Britain, and the United States begin Operation Unified Protector. March 19, 2011. French fighter jets strike Gaddafi regime tanks advancing on Benghazi. American and British ships launch cruise missiles at Libyan air defenses. The intervention has begun. For Saif, this validates his February 20th warning about foreign intervention. He can now claim, accurately, that Libya faces a NATO assault. But the intervention happened because his regime was killing civilians on a massive scale. Cause and effect blur in the fog of war. NATO's intervention changes the war's dynamics fundamentally. With air supremacy, revolutionary forces can advance without fear of being obliterated by Gaddafi's armor and aircraft. Cities under siege, especially Misrata, receive breathing room. The revolutionaries who seemed on the verge of defeat get new life. But NATO's involvement doesn't mean quick victory. The war becomes a grinding stalemate. Revolutionary forces control the east and parts of the west but can't break through to Tripoli. Gaddafi's forces hold the capital and his tribal heartland but can't crush the revolution. The conflict drags through spring into summer. Saif's role evolves. He's no longer the face of reform. That image is destroyed beyond recovery. Instead, he becomes his father's defender, appearing in propaganda videos, giving defiant interviews, insisting the regime will prevail. He appears in a video standing in the ruins of a building destroyed by NATO bombing. "This is what your humanitarian intervention looks like," he says to the camera. "Destroying homes, killing civilians. This is Western imperialism disguised as human rights." There's truth in his criticism. NATO's intervention does kill civilians, does destroy infrastructure, but it pales compared to what his regime has done. Saif also tries diplomacy, reaching out through back channels to negotiate a settlement. He proposes that his father remain as symbolic leader while real power transfers to a transitional government. Revolutionary leadership rejects every proposal. They want Gaddafi gone completely, dead or exiled, but gone. June 2011. The International Criminal Court issues arrest warrants for Muammar Gaddafi, Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, and Abdullah Senussi for crimes against humanity. The charges include murder and persecution related to the February 2011 crackdown. For Saif, the warrant is both expected and devastating. He's now officially an international fugitive, wanted for the same category of crimes as war criminals from Bosnia, Rwanda, Sudan. His LSE degree, his humanitarian foundation, his years cultivating a reformist image, all destroyed. He's a wanted man. July to August 2011. The war's momentum shifts decisively. Revolutionary forces capture strategic cities in western Libya. Supply lines to Tripoli tighten. NATO intensifies bombing of government positions. Defections from the regime increase. Military officers, diplomats, government officials see the end approaching and switch sides. Saif remains in Tripoli, trapped in a shrinking zone of regime control. His brothers lead military operations. Qamis commands an elite brigade defending Tripoli. Mutassim coordinates security forces. They fight desperately, but the outcome becomes increasingly obvious. August 20th, 2011. Revolutionary forces launch a coordinated assault on Tripoli. Sleeper cells inside the city rise up, attacking government positions from within. NATO bombing intensifies. Revolutionary forces pour into the city from multiple directions. The battle for Tripoli is fierce and chaotic, street-to-street fighting. Neighborhoods change hands multiple times. Government forces defend desperately. Civilians are caught in crossfire. The city of 1.2 million people becomes a war zone. Saif and his family retreat to Bab al-Azizia, the fortified compound where he grew up. It's the regime's last stronghold, heavily defended, symbolic, and increasingly surrounded. August 23, 2011. Revolutionary forces breach Bab al-Azizia's walls. The assault lasts hours. Defenders fire from buildings. Revolutionaries advance through gardens Saif played in as a child. The compound falls. Saif escapes in the confusion. Exactly how remains unclear. Some reports say through underground tunnels. Others through last-minute negotiation with revolutionary commanders willing to be bribed. What's certain is that while revolutionaries celebrate capturing the compound and destroying his father's tent, Saif vanishes into Tripoli's chaos. For several days, he moves through the city, staying with loyalists, trying to organize resistance. It's futile. The regime has collapsed. His father has fled. His brothers are scattered or dead. Tripoli is lost. On August 25th, Saif makes a bizarre appearance. Surrounded by a small group of loyalists, he drives through the Rixos Hotel area where foreign journalists are trapped. He speaks to journalists briefly, claiming the regime is winning, that reports of Tripoli's fall are exaggerated, that his father will prevail. It's his last public appearance as a free man. The journalist can see he's desperate, exhausted, probably injured based on how he moves. His claims are delusional. Tripoli has clearly fallen, but Saif seems unable to accept reality. He disappears again. Muammar Gaddafi flees to Sirte, his hometown and last remaining stronghold. Saif apparently tries to reach him there, traveling with a small convoy through the desert, avoiding revolutionary checkpoints, using back roads and tribal connections. September to October 2011. Revolutionary forces consolidate control of Tripoli and begin advancing on remaining regime holdouts. Sirte becomes the final battleground, a coastal city where Muammar Gaddafi makes his last stand. The battle for Sirte is brutal. Gaddafi's remaining loyalists fight block by block, building by building. Revolutionary forces, backed by NATO air support, gradually overwhelm them. The city is devastated, thousands killed, infrastructure destroyed. October 20th, 2011. Muammar Gaddafi is captured trying to flee Sirte. Revolutionary fighters find him hiding in a drainage pipe. He's dragged out, beaten, and killed within hours. His body is displayed in a meat locker in Misrata, where crowds come to see the tyrant's corpse. Video of Gaddafi's capture and death spreads worldwide. It's violent, disturbing, and constitutes a summary execution. Human rights organizations condemn it, but for Libyans who suffered under Gaddafi for 42 years, his death is liberation. News reaches Saif in the desert. His father is dead. 3 of his brothers, Mutasim, Khamis, and Saif al-Arab, are also dead. The regime that ruled Libya for 4 decades is finished. Saif is now alone, running through the Sahara with a handful of loyalists, knowing that revolutionary forces are hunting him, knowing that international courts want him, knowing that his family's era has ended in blood and defeat. November 19th, 2011. The scene from our opening returns. Saif's small convoy races through the desert south of Tripoli. He's heading toward Niger or Algeria, neighboring countries where he might find refuge. His group includes a few bodyguards and his right-hand man, a trusted advisor who's been with him throughout the war. They've been traveling for weeks, moving at night, hiding during the day, using tribal contacts to avoid revolutionary checkpoints. Saif has grown a beard. He's lost weight. His hand, injured in a NATO airstrike months earlier, is poorly treated and infected. He's a shadow of the confident playboy who partied in London nightclubs. The convoy stops for fuel at a small desert settlement. It's a mistake. Someone recognizes Saif despite the beard and alerts revolutionary fighters from Zintan, a mountain town that fought fiercely against Gaddafi. The Zintan brigade arrives quickly. They surround Saif's convoy. Gunfire is exchanged, but Saif's small group is hopelessly outnumbered. The choice is fight and die, or surrender and survive. Saif chooses survival. He steps out of the vehicle, hands raised, and identifies himself. The Zintan fighters can't believe their luck. They've captured Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, the ICC wanted war criminal, the dictator's heir, the man who promised to fight to the last bullet. He's supposed to be dead or escaped to a neighboring country. Instead, he's standing before them in the desert, exhausted and defeated. They take him to Zintan, displaying him to journalists to prove the capture is real. Photos show Saif in a brown robe and turban, his right hand heavily bandaged, his expression a mix of fear and resignation. He's lost 3 fingers on that hand, blown off in the NATO strike that also wounded him. When journalists ask him questions, Saif responds calmly. "Libya will not be better because I'm captured," he says. "The war will continue. The tribes will fight. You'll see." It's both prediction and threat. Libya is indeed descending into chaos. Rival militias control different regions. No central authority has emerged. Violence continues despite Gaddafi's death. But Saif's claim that only his family could rule Libya is self-serving. Human Rights Watch sends representatives to verify his treatment. They report that he appears physically okay despite his injuries, though clearly exhausted. They note that he's being held in isolation and has limited access to lawyers. The Zintan Brigade refuses to hand him over to the new government in Tripoli, viewing him as valuable leverage in Libya's post-revolutionary power struggles. November to December 2011. Legal battles begin immediately over Saif's fate. The International Criminal Court demands Libya surrender him for trial in The Hague. The new Libyan government insists he should be tried in Libya for crimes against Libyans. The Zintan Brigade that's actually holding him refuses to give him to anyone without guarantees about their own political future. Saif sits in a cell in Zintan, watching his world dissolve. His father is dead. His brothers are dead. His regime is destroyed. His reform dreams are revealed as naive delusions. He's wanted for crimes against humanity by international courts and sentenced to death by Libyan courts. In quieter moments, does he reflect on decisions that led here? Does he wonder if he could have broken with his father in February 2011, joined the revolution, saved himself? Does he regret the speech on February 20th that destroyed his reformist credibility? We don't know. Saif gives no interviews from captivity, but his capture completes a staggering fall from the Prince of Tripoli who lectured at London School of Economics and partied with supermodels to a prisoner in a mountain stronghold, disfigured by war, facing possible execution. The story seems to end here. The dictator's son has been defeated, captured, and will presumably face justice. Libya can begin rebuilding without Gaddafi interference. But this isn't the end. It's barely the beginning of Saif al-Islam Gaddafi's strange journey through Libya's post-revolutionary chaos. Before we dive into the most mysterious period of Saif's story, where he disappears from public view for nearly a decade, and rumors swirl about everything from mental breakdown to secret negotiations, make sure you're subscribed to this channel and hit that bell icon. What happens next involves international legal battles, competing governments, and a vanishing act that will leave more questions than answers. Drop a comment below with your theories about what really happened during Saif's lost years. December 2011 to March 2012. 3 different entities claim jurisdiction over Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, creating a legal tangle that reveals Libya's post-revolutionary chaos. First, the International Criminal Court. The ICC's arrest warrant from June 2011 charges Saif with crimes against humanity, specifically murder and persecution. Under the Rome Statute that created the ICC, Libya, which isn't technically an ICC member but is subject to UN Security Council referral, has an obligation to surrender Saif to The Hague. ICC prosecutor Luis Moreno Ocampo publicly demands Libya comply. Saif al-Islam Gaddafi must face international justice, he declares. The ICC has jurisdiction over crimes against humanity, and Libya must fulfill its obligations. Second, the Libyan government in Tripoli. The Transitional National Council, which governs post-revolutionary Libya, insists Saif should be tried in Libyan courts. These are crimes against Libyans, TNC leaders argue. Libyans should judge him. Our courts are capable of delivering justice. The Tripoli government files legal challenges with the ICC claiming complementarity, arguing that because Libya's own justice system is investigating and prosecuting Saif, The ICC should defer to domestic jurisdiction. Third, the Zintan Brigade actually holding Saif. They refuse to hand him to anyone. Zintan fought fiercely against Gaddafi and suffered heavy casualties. They view Saif as a war prize, leveraged to ensure their interests in Libya's new political order. "We'll hand him over when the time is right," Zintan commanders say cryptically. "When there's real security, real justice, real guarantees." Behind this public statement lies realpolitik. Zintan is one of several powerful militia groups competing for influence in post-Gaddafi Libya. Whoever controls Saif controls a valuable asset, a bargaining chip in negotiations over power sharing, resource allocation, political positions. International legal experts watch this jurisdictional battle with fascination and concern. It reveals fundamental questions about international justice. Can national courts try crimes against humanity as effectively as international tribunals? When national interests conflict with international legal obligations, which prevails? How do you enforce international law when the state holding the accused refuses to comply? For Saif, the legal complexity means continued imprisonment, but also protection from immediate trial. As long as different entities fight over jurisdiction, he remains in Zintan. Not ideal, but safer than being handed to courts in Tripoli that might sentence him to death, or transferred to The Hague, where he'd face life imprisonment. 2012 to 2014. Information about Saif's imprisonment emerges slowly through lawyer visits, human rights monitoring, and occasional leaked reports. He's held in a secure compound in Zintan's mountains. The cell is basic: bed, toilet, desk, but not tortured or abused in ways Libya's prisons are infamous for. The Zintan Brigade understands that Saif's value depends on keeping him alive and relatively healthy. A dead or severely abused prisoner loses bargaining power. His injured hand receives medical treatment, though the 3 missing fingers cannot be restored. He's allowed books. His guards report he reads extensively, everything from Islamic texts to political philosophy to European literature. He exercises daily in a small courtyard. He maintains the personal discipline developed during his LSE years. Lawyers who visit describe Saif as remarkably composed given his circumstances. He doesn't rant or rave, one attorney reports. He's articulate, thoughtful, engaged with legal arguments. He insists he committed no crimes and that history will vindicate him. This insistence on innocence is psychologically interesting. Saif doesn't claim he opposed the crackdown. The evidence of his February 20th speech is irrefutable. Instead, he argues that the revolution was indeed a foreign-backed conspiracy, that his regime's response was legitimate self-defense, and that NATO intervention constituted the real crime. It's a narrative that's delusional or profoundly cynical, depending on interpretation. But Saif appears genuinely convinced. Perhaps that's the only way he can psychologically survive. By rejecting the revolution's legitimacy, he can reject his own responsibility for the violence it provoked. In 2013, the Tripoli government begins organizing trials for Gaddafi regime officials. 37 defendants face charges ranging from crimes against humanity to financial corruption. The proceedings are controversial from the start. Judges appointed by revolutionary authorities. Defendants, including figures like Abdullah Senussi, who face predetermined outcomes. Legal procedures that don't meet international standards. Saif is included in the trial, but the Zintan Brigade refuses to transfer him to Tripoli. Instead, he appears via video link from Zintan, his image projected onto a screen in the Tripoli courtroom. It's surreal. Saif, sitting in a cell in Zintan, are visible on a screen, while prosecutors in Tripoli present evidence against him and Abu Salim massacre families watch from the gallery. He can see the courtroom but cannot physically be there, creating a sense of simultaneous presence and absence. During his video appearances, Saif wears traditional Libyan clothing, a brown robe, white cap, quite different from the expensive Western suits he favored before. He speaks calmly, addressing the judges respectfully, challenging evidence methodically. "I am innocent of all charges," he states during one session. "I worked for Libya's benefit. I attempted reform. I tried to prevent violence. That I failed doesn't make me a criminal." The trial drags on for months. Evidence is presented, witness testimony about the February crackdown, documents from the regime, recordings of Saif's speeches and interviews. The outcome is never in doubt. July 28, 2015. The Tripoli court announces its verdict. Saif al-Islam Gaddafi is found guilty of crimes against humanity and sentenced to death by firing squad. The verdict is announced in a chaotic courtroom scene. Abu Salim families cheer. Human rights observers take notes. International media rush to report the news. Saif appears on video link, his expression unreadable as the judge reads the sentence. Also sentenced to death: Abdullah Senussi, Saif's uncle and the regime's intelligence chief. 8 other regime officials receive death sentences. Others receive life imprisonment or long prison terms. International reaction is swift and critical. The UN criticizes the trial's fairness. The ICC argues Libya has violated its obligation to surrender Saif to international jurisdiction. Human rights organizations note procedural deficiencies, defendants lacking adequate legal representation, evidence obtained through torture, political pressure on judges. The European Union, which opposes capital punishment, calls for the death sentences to be commuted. While we recognize Libya's right to pursue justice for serious crimes, an EU statement reads, "Death sentences following trials that don't meet international standards cannot be accepted." But here's the crucial detail. The Zintan Brigade doesn't recognize the Tripoli court's authority. They never handed Saif over during the trial. They don't intend to hand him over for execution. "The Tripoli government doesn't control us," Zintan commanders state. "They can issue whatever verdicts they want. Saif remains in our custody." This creates an extraordinary situation. Saif has been sentenced to death, but the sentence cannot be carried out because the entity that sentenced him doesn't control the prisoner. It's simultaneously a death sentence and a protection. As long as Zintan holds him, Tripoli cannot execute him. Why does Zintan protect Saif despite his conviction? Multiple factors explain their position. First, Zintan has its own grievances with the Tripoli government over power sharing and resource allocation. Maintaining control of Saif is leverage in those disputes. December 2021. As the scheduled election date approaches, Libya's political situation deteriorates. The election meant to unify the country instead becomes another source of division. Multiple issues plague the process. First, the legal framework is disputed. Different Libyan authorities, the Tripoli-based Government of National Unity, the Tobruk-based House of Representatives, various courts, issue conflicting rulings about candidate eligibility, voting procedures, and electoral oversight. Second, dozens of candidates register, including Saif, General Khalifa Haftar, the Eastern military commander, Prime Minister Abdul Hamid Dbeibah, who pledged not to run but did anyway, and various tribal leaders and political figures. Many of these candidacies violate official rules about dual citizenship, military service, or legal status, but enforcement is inconsistent. Third, security remains fragile. Militias control territory throughout Libya. There's no consensus about who would ensure election security, count votes, or enforce results if a candidate unacceptable to certain factions wins. Fourth, international observers express concerns about whether free and fair voting is possible in a country where armed groups intimidate civilians and where large regions lack basic services. December 24th, 2021, the scheduled election date, approaches. Campaign activities are minimal. Most candidates cannot safely campaign nationally. Saif certainly cannot. He remains in southern Libya, unable to travel to Tripoli or Benghazi without risking arrest or assassination. On December 22nd, Libya's election commission announces a postponement. Due to technical and legal challenges, the presidential election is postponed indefinitely. A new date will be announced when conditions permit. It's a devastating blow to hopes for democratic transition. International mediators who spent years working toward this election watch their efforts collapse. Libyans hoping elections might create legitimate government face continued uncertainty. For Saif, the postponement is simultaneously disappointing and relieving. He cannot win an election he cannot campaign for, but postponement means avoiding a potential defeat that would end his political relevance. As long as elections remain scheduled but unimplemented, he remains a potential candidate, his political future uncertain but not foreclosed. The postponement also reveals fundamental problems with the entire electoral approach. Libya lacks the basic prerequisites for democratic elections: security, agreed-upon legal framework, institutional capacity to implement voting, acceptance by armed factions that losing an election means relinquishing power peacefully. Attempting elections without these foundations doesn't advance democracy. It exposes how far Libya remains from functional statehood. 2022 to 2025. As we approach the present day, Saif al-Islam Gaddafi lives in a strange liminal state, neither fully free nor imprisoned, neither politically active nor completely sidelined, neither accepted by Libyan society nor entirely rejected. His daily life, based on reports from the few people with access to him, revolves around a compound in southern Libya. Security remains tight, both to protect him from assassination attempts and to control his movements and communications. He reportedly maintains a disciplined routine: morning prayers, exercise, reading and study, meetings with advisors and tribal leaders, evening reflection. It's a life that combines elements of exile, house arrest, and political headquarters. He's lost the playboy lifestyle forever. No London nightclubs, no yacht parties, no supermodel girlfriends. That version of Saif, the cosmopolitan prince who seemed comfortable in Western capitals, is as dead as his father. The current Saif presents himself as a pious Muslim, a Libyan nationalist, a potential unifying leader. Whether this represents genuine transformation or calculated political positioning remains unclear. Perhaps both. People can change while also recognizing that change serves strategic purposes. His support network maintains active efforts on his behalf. Social media accounts regularly post about Libya's problems and subtly suggest Saif represents solutions. Tribal leaders throughout southern Libya coordinate with his representatives. Exile communities, especially in Tunisia, organize political activities. Financial resources remain murky. The Gaddafi family accumulated billions during 4 decades of rule. Much was frozen by international sanctions, but significant amounts were hidden in complex financial structures. Saif apparently retains access to funds, enough to maintain security, pay staff, and finance political activities. His right-hand man in London serves as primary liaison with international contacts. This individual carefully manages Saif's image, controls media access, and coordinates with potential supporters in various countries. But Saif faces immense challenges to any realistic political comeback. The ICC warrant remains active. So while Libya doesn't enforce it and Saif never travels internationally, it limits his options and provides legal justification for arrest if circumstances change. The Tripoli death sentence, though unenforceable, hangs over him symbolically and legally. Many Libyans, possibly a majority, view him as a war criminal who should face justice, not seek office. International acceptance is limited. Russia might support him, but Western powers remain skeptical or hostile. Libya's fragmentation continues. 2 rival governments claim legitimacy, multiple militias control territory, political consensus remains elusive. Yet Saif persists. His team continues positioning him for potential elections if they ever occur. He gives occasional interviews to sympathetic journalists, always emphasizing reconciliation, stability, and Libyan sovereignty. As this long, strange story reaches the present day, it raises profound questions that extend beyond one man's rise, fall, and attempted return. Can dictators' children escape their family's legacy? Saif tried to be different from his father, educated in the West, committed to reform, or so he claimed, engaged with democracy's theoretical foundations. But when crisis came, he defended the dictatorship, threatened violence, and participated in repression. Was his reformist image ever genuine, or was it always performance? If it was genuine, what does his failure say about the possibility of reforming authoritarianism from within? What does Libya's post-revolutionary trajectory teach about regime change? The 2011 revolution overthrew a dictator, but couldn't build functional state institutions. A decade later, Libya suffers from worse governance, security, and economic conditions than under Gaddafi. Does this vindicate Saif's warning that revolution would bring chaos? Or does it simply demonstrate that toppling a dictator is easier than building democracy, especially when foreign intervention and domestic militias prevent coherent state formation? How should societies balance justice and reconciliation? South Africa created truth and reconciliation processes after apartheid. Rwanda prosecuted genocide perpetrators while also promoting national unity. Libya has pursued neither effectively. Some Gaddafi officials faced questionable trials, others escaped accountability, and no genuine reconciliation process occurred. Would allowing Saif to participate in politics represent pragmatic recognition that punishment hasn't brought stability? Or would it constitute moral collapse that insults victims? What role should international law play in national politics? The ICC exists to prosecute crimes against humanity when national courts cannot or will not. But the ICC has no enforcement mechanism beyond state cooperation. If Libya chooses not to arrest Saif, if international powers decline to pressure Libya to comply, the ICC becomes symbolically important but practically irrelevant. Does this reveal international law's limitations, or does it simply demonstrate that law requires political will to enforce? Is Saif's attempted comeback about him personally, or about what he represents? Many Libyans supporting Saif don't necessarily love him or forgive his family's crimes. They support him because he represents order versus chaos, predictability versus uncertainty, a tribal connection versus fragmented militias. He's a symbol more than an individual. But can symbolic politics deliver genuine improvement, or does it simply trade one form of authoritarianism for another? These questions have no easy answers. Reasonable people disagree based on different weightings of justice, stability, pragmatism, and principle. We began this story with Saif al-Islam Gaddafi in the desert in November 2011, surrounded by militia fighters, his father dead, his regime destroyed, his future apparently over. We've traced his journey from privileged upbringing through failed reform attempts, brutal civil war, capture, imprisonment, death sentence, mysterious disappearance, and improbable political comeback attempt. Now, in 2025, his story remains unfinished. Will he ever face trial at the ICC? Will Libya's courts eventually execute the death sentence? Will postponed elections ever occur, and if so, could he actually compete? Will his attempted comeback fade as he ages in semi-captivity, eventually becoming an irrelevant footnote to Libya's revolutionary era? Or, and this is what makes his story compelling and disturbing, could he actually return to power? It seems unlikely. The obstacles are immense. But Libya has surprised observers before. If the country's chaos continues, if Libyans become sufficiently desperate for stability, if international powers decide a Gaddafi restoration serves their interests, the impossible could become real. Libya today remains a failed state. Two rival governments claim legitimacy, but control limited territory. Oil production, the economy's foundation, fluctuates wildly based on militia conflicts and infrastructure damage. Hundreds of thousands of Libyans live as refugees. Migrants from across Africa transit through Libya, often suffering horrific abuse, attempting dangerous Mediterranean crossings to Europe. ISIS briefly held territory and could return. The country that Muammar Gaddafi ruled for 42 years has effectively ceased to exist as a functional state. In this context, some Libyans ask, would any government, even one led by a Gaddafi, be better than no government at all? It's a tragic question that reflects how far Libya has fallen, but it's the question that gives Saif political space. For victims of the Gaddafi regime, Abu Salim massacre families, 2011 uprising survivors, the countless Libyans who suffered under dictatorship, Saif's potential return represents ultimate injustice. They fought for freedom, sacrificed loved ones, endured trauma, only to face the possibility that their oppressor's son might rule them again. It's a betrayal of everything the revolution promised. For international justice advocates, Saif's candidacy demonstrates law's limits. The ICC issued an arrest warrant. Libya ignored it. International powers declined to enforce it. The result, a war crimes suspect running for president while his arrest warrant becomes meaningless paperwork. For stability advocates, diplomats, some Libyan tribal leaders, pragmatists willing to prioritize order over justice, Saif represents a potential solution to intractable problems. Not an ideal solution, not a just solution, but perhaps a functional one. These competing perspectives cannot be reconciled. Libya's future will be determined by which perspective gains sufficient power to impose its vision. Will justice advocates force accountability? Will revolutionaries prevent Gaddafi restoration? Will pragmatists engineer a stability-focused settlement? Will chaos simply continue indefinitely? As of now, the last option seems most likely. Libya drifts without resolution, different factions controlling territory, competing governments claiming legitimacy, Saif hovering as potential candidate. If elections ever occur, nothing changing fundamentally. This might be Libya's tragedy, not dramatic collapse into genocidal violence, but indefinite stagnation as a failed state that's not quite failed enough to force decisive action. People suffering but not quite enough to generate international intervention. Democracy desired but institutions too weak to implement it. Justice demanded but power too fragmented to deliver it. And Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, the sword of Islam, remains in his southern compound, reading, praying, planning, waiting for Libya to become desperate enough to accept a Gaddafi again, waiting for international politics to shift in his favor, waiting for the death sentence and ICC warrant to become irrelevant through passage of time and change in circumstances, waiting to discover whether his improbable journey leads to redemption, imprisonment, execution, or simply continued irrelevance. The story remains unfinished because Libya's story remains unfinished. And as long as Libya searches for stability without finding it, as long as the revolution's promise of freedom yields only chaos, Saif's political ghost will haunt the country his father ruled and destroyed. What do you think about this extraordinary story? Should someone convicted of crimes against humanity ever be allowed to seek political office? Is stability more important than justice? Can Libya ever recover from its revolutionary trauma? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've watched this entire investigation, from Saif's privileged childhood through his failed reform efforts, his role in civil war violence, his capture and imprisonment, and his improbable comeback attempt, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. This story required months of research across multiple continents, reviewing court documents, following international legal proceedings, and tracking developments in one of the world's most complex and underreported conflicts. Your support makes this kind of in-depth investigative content possible. The story of Saif al-Islam Gaddafi is ultimately the story of Libya itself, a nation blessed with resources but cursed by dictatorship, revolution, and state failure. A nation searching for a future while trapped by its past. A nation where the son of a dead dictator can credibly seek the presidency because 10 years of a revolution, nothing better has emerged. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and remember, understanding the world's most complex stories requires looking beyond headlines to the deeper currents of history, power, and human ambition.